Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Calfee webinar featuring the Mayor of Cleveland. I'm Brent Ballard, Managing Partner of the Calfee Law Firm. Privileged today to introduce our featured guest, the Honorable Frank G. Jackson. Before this friendly audience, he hardly needs an introduction. In his fourth term, Mayor Jackson is set to become the longest serving mayor in Cleveland history. He's led our city through daunting challenges like transforming schools and city neighborhoods. Today, he's at it again, leading us through the unprecedented pandemic of our time. On Monday afternoon, he laid out his plan for restarting Cleveland. And now I'd like to introduce Ray Tarasic and Mike Bowen, two members of Calfee's Government Relations Group, who will lead today's discussion with the mayor on COVID-19 and the City of Cleveland's plan for the future. Gentlemen?
Thanks, Brent, and Mayor, thanks for joining us. We're going to get right into it here. So, as you can imagine, everyone is nervous about the virus continuing to spread. What measures has Cleveland Public Health taken and put in place to prevent the spread of the virus so far?
Well, so far, we're doing contact tracing. We're working particularly with those hot spots in areas where there's concentration and density of people, nursing homes or long-term care facilities, where you have people who are most at risk. We do public service announcements. All types of communication. We're on TV, we're on radio, we're doing that. So we try to keep people informed, but we've entered into a new era of this thing, particularly in terms of the gradual reopening of our economy. And with that, we're taking another approach, which is doubling down on what we're currently doing, but also adding more of a education, prevention, and intervention strategy, and redirecting resources and personnel into that.
Marin, I think that goes into the next question we had really well. I mean, education is a big part of your Restart Cleveland program, especially around the health issues. So, can you talk a little bit more about that, about the education going forward from a health perspective?
Well, first of all, we want to be efficient and effective about what we do. So there's already a lot of data out there in terms of hotspots. Of course, we don't provide specifics in terms of actual buildings or homes or people, but in general, we know the hotspots, we know the mapping of it, and we know the at-risk people. And so if you look at density as one thing, chronic illness, underlying chronic illness, and age, those three factors are major factors. So as we collect data on that helps to inform us in terms of what our strategy is, where our efforts are. So if we have places where there's high infections, again, such as congregate living, then we work with our medical institutions and the medical directors there to concentrate effort there for particularly to stop that spread in those confined areas and to get proper service. Now we're into education mode and a prevention mode. And what we're doing is, we have essential and non-essential employees, and we are identifying those non-essential employees who are at home, still getting paid and performing some duties, but not much. And so we're now training them over the next couple of weeks to be outreach workers, to go into these dense areas where we have density, and into residential areas. We're targeting seniors, and to provide that prevention, education, and helping them to be able to take appropriate steps if in fact they believe that they have a problem or someone in their family. So it's really in doing the contact tracing. So we're deploying people into those efforts and resources into those efforts that are not costing us any more money, because we already are paying people and to do work. It's just that this is the new work that they'll be doing.
So, Mayor, you touched on community outreach, and we know that that's a part of the plan, and it's a big part of the plan.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of training are these employees that you've moved over to community outreach receiving? And as they go out, you know, essentially, how do they know what they're doing?
Well, Friday we'll be doing training the trainers. The trainers training the trainees, or whatever it is when you train people to then train other people. And we're consulting with expert who has some experience in pandemics in the military to help us in terms of what that training should look like. You know, what the elements of that training should be, and then on starting next week, the people who have been trained to train other people will begin to train the employees that we're deploying into that area. And then they will go out and almost like a trial run later in the week to perform. And then next week, they'll come back to me and tell me how that's working and whether or not we need to tweak it. And that's basically how we do it. The details of what the message is in terms of training, I leave that up to the experts, and they'll be doing that. How they interact with people, there'll be sensitivity, how you deal with seniors. And what we want to do is many of our employees have relationships in certain parts of our community, and those who have those relationships, we would attempt to deploy them there where they have some familiarity with the people there, the people have familiarity with them. They won't work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. They will be rotated in and out so that we can really kind of manage it and not burn people out, particularly those people who this is not what they do. This has not been what they do.
So, Mayor, in addition to the education and the outreach and monitoring part of your program that you announced, it also calls for a number of programs to mitigate some of the short-term economic impact that businesses have had and individuals have had. And I think there's three main programs that your plan calls for. Could you discuss a little bit each one of those programs for us, please?
I will. Let me first start out by, I know this is we label it like our plan for recovery, but as you can tell, just looking at the dollar amount, that's not going to get it.
Right.
And as you also know that government can take leadership in things or set directions and policy, but the real determiner of whether or not, in this case, the economy is brought up and whether or not we are moving in the right direction for recovery in the future is really will be based on the private sector. So what we're doing is attempting to address the immediacy of people and businesses who have been affected as a result of the virus. So that means our immediate action is really to deal with that. The growth actions that we'll have to take will have to be in partnership with the private sector and how the private sector behaves. So I just want to put it in that context, that this is not just this $30 million or this $10 million is not going to solve the problem. Right. But what it will do is help to mitigate the suffering and the burden of small businesses and people. And we plan to do that by looking at a low interest loan of $10,000 to help cover some expenses of small business like rent and utilities and things like that for a 90-day period or so, and have it retroactive back to March, and then have it no payment on that to January next year. We're also looking at businesses that are 30 or 35 employees or more, and providing them with $100,000 of low interest loan, almost like a line of credit, something that gives them a cash flow, and we will have some forgivable aspects of these things depending on whether or not they retain or go back to pre-virus employment level. On smaller businesses, less than 30, I think it is, that's 25,000. And then we're looking at the special, what we call like special needs kind of businesses that have been immediately impacted, that were very specific when they were told to close, like barbershops, beautician shops, restaurants, some storefronts that are affected. And so we're looking at them and we're saying, we will provide some assistance to them. And what we are looking for from them, I think, is $20,000 of assistance. And they can have up to 50% of that $20,000 forgiven if they too get back to their prior employment level, and so that we can help them to not just get in business, to employ, and also helping them on what they will have to do physically and structurally with their operation, just to be able to open back up, which would mean they will need some, I'll give you an example of that. Hair salons, barbershops are required to have certain kind of ventilation because they use certain products where they have chemicals and things in it. That could be quite a bit of money, some thousands of dollars. So what we would do is say that we would, if it's going towards that cost, we would help you with that. Maybe that turns into a grant, right? Now, the interesting thing about this, in terms of these smaller businesses that we've identified, and even those larger ones that we identified in the other category, is that they've had zero or minimum revenue stream. And they reduced their costs to the point where they couldn't reduce it anymore, but they still had to cover and carry some costs, right? Just to say that they're still in business. Now they're being asked to ramp up at full cost, plus an additional demand based on social distancing or some special equipments that they need, right? But at the same time, their customer base will not, in the volume of customers will not return. So in that sense, it's almost, why would you even reopen? Why would you do it? Because you're going to lose money. It's going to cost you more to reopen, and you're guaranteed to have less revenue because of the restrictions around social distancing and special equipment that you have to have. So we're trying to help them through that period of time to help them. But again, this is not a recovery for Cleveland's economy as a whole. This is a recovery for those types of business that I mentioned, and also setting the stage as we stabilize small, medium-sized business. If we begin to help stabilize them, get them back into profit-making mode, that we also look at our large business and our corporate spending and institutional spending to be investing back into our local economy. Example, the city of Cleveland, even if we laid off half the people of the city of Cleveland, we still have to stay open, which means we're going to spend money. The question is who we contract with to procure those goods and services that we need. I'm saying that if we are sincere about rebuilding our economy, then we should invest whatever we have to spend to stay in business into our local economy, which supports small, medium-sized business, support employment activity, supports a consumer market that we believe will go much further than if we're contracting goods and services outside of our economic footprint.
So, Mayor, along those lines, you know, as businesses need help and assistance, so do individuals. So,
Right.
Can you talk about how the Restart CLE plan addresses some of those needs for individuals. And I know that's a concern of yours personally. So,
Well, it's the impact of this is if you look at the recession of 2008 and 9, that's mild compared to what this thing has already become faster than the recession of 2008 and 9. We've gotten there faster, is deeper already, and the trajectory for recovery is much longer. And which means the impact of that on business resulting in the impact of employment and things like that is going to be around for a while. So people have lost their job, but they have mortgages, they have rent, they have utility bills, they have all these things that a business would have, but they don't have the ability to sustain themselves. So we want to prevent homelessness. So we put the bulk of the social service dollars into rent subsidies. They help people in terms of their rent or lease arrangements. And it does not matter because, these are HUD dollars, this portion of the money. And so there's certain HUD guidelines. And what we're saying, and we're not going to be asking people for their filing of taxes for 2019 that demonstrates that they're ineligible for the funds. We're going to be looking at them right now. And right now, they ain't got no money. Right. They're zero, so they all qualify, right? So as a result of that, then we can assist them as they wait to see if, in fact, they get reemployed or if their unemployment benefits kick in. So that means we'll have to stay on it and monitor it and recertify people at least on a monthly basis, because once they begin to receive income, then the eligibility will either be modified greatly or they won't be eligible anymore. And we can use that money to help someone else. We're looking at people who are in homeless shelters or have deficient immune systems, HIV/AIDS, and we're looking at how do we help them and help the county as the county provides that service. When we help, if I can back up, when we help the tenant, we're also helping the small business landlord who now is forced by a moratorium on eviction to have people at their property and they cannot lease that out and have revenue coming in. So we're looking at all of that too. And food service, don't let me forget that. A high demand at the food bank, electricity, utility bills, other type of assistance that people just need help on until such time as they go back to work in some fashion or receive unemployment benefit. And then we just move those resources to someone else in need.
Mayor, about a month or so ago, you did an interview with the City Club. It was early in April,
right?
And I listened to that particular discussion you had with the City Club, and I recall in that discussion that you had said that this was very, very early on in this whole process going through this. And I recall in that discussion that you had said that the city had foresight to build into the budget an anticipation of a recession coming ahead, and that you would really know in the next month going forward what kind of impact this is going to start to see on the city. At that point in time, it was really too early to see what impact it was going to have. Could you comment now about a month or so later, after we've seen maybe 6 weeks go by, about that cushion, I think that's in that budget and what we're looking at going forward now?
Well, the good thing about going through hard times is that you can almost smell it. It's like having street antennas. Is it? So we fully recognize that even though the economy was doing quite well, it even the stock market at that time, that it did have an artificial feel to it, and that eventually we were going to have a downturn. Our expectation was that it would probably be in the fourth quarter this year or early next year, first quarter next year. But as you cannot predict these things, and the pandemic came, which meant that what we expected to happen in the fourth quarter or this year or the first quarter next year is happened immediately. Fortunately, we did build in a recession type budget that if it happened when we anticipated, and depending on the level of the recession and in terms of the death and the recovery time, we figured that we'd build in a year and a half, and maybe a year and a half at the most, maybe 2 years, but a year and a half of our ability to provide goods and services, and to people, and not have to have layoffs and things like that. And we would be able to manage it. Of course, it came much sooner than we expected, much deeper than we thought it would be. And it appears the duration is going to be much, much longer than anticipated. So with that in mind, we now are monitoring our revenue streams. Because of a lack of social gathering and mass gathering, and as you know, we're a consumer economy, and our downtown is built on having large numbers of people milling around at sporting events, restaurants, conventions, and things like that, being in hotels. All of the revenues associated with that are pretty much gone, whether it's hotel taxes or parking tax, admission tax, all of those. And so we're looking at that. And then we looked at the revenue coming from income tax. And the revenue coming from payroll tax, since it did not happen really until April, when you begin to see the real downturn, the receipts coming in all the way through March were on the positive side. Not only were they at budgeted projection, they were higher. But as we look at April has already taken like a $6 or $7 million hit in that payroll tax line item, which is the bulk of our revenue stream. And so when we look at, as we monitor May, and we get a sense as to, and looking at this gradual reopening, I will say the governor is much more responsible at doing this than I've seen his counterparts in other parts of the country. But as we look at that, in May, we'll be able to see now, is it consistently low at this level, and this is what we can expect? Is it going down even deeper? And then that will inform us in which plan we begin to implement in terms of cost cutting. We've already done a hiring freeze. We've already done some procurement freeze. We already have done some things to cut costs and maintain costs. But the bulk of our costs is in personnel and benefits. And this income tax going into May will give us a pretty good indication as to what steps we should take going forward to doing further cuts. Now, let me add on to that. That's just based on the economy. When you look at what is happening in terms of government and the revenue sharing between various government entities from the federal and state level, we're expecting now, particularly since the governor made his announcements yesterday, we believe that those announcements, well, we know that those announcements are affecting people in terms of Medicaid or schools in terms of their increase in costs in their budget. But what we expect is the next round of cuts will be in terms of direct revenue sharing with cities. And if that happens, then we're probably talking about tens of millions of dollars throughout the year. And you add that along with the reduction in revenue receipts from the lack of activity and payroll, then you can see it will get pretty deep and eat up whatever reserves we have very quickly. If that helps, if that's explanatory enough.
No, it's certainly going to be challenging. It'll certainly be
Well,
challenging.
yeah, but see, that's the good thing about, see, hard times is what we do. I don't have a problem with hard times. I would prefer it be good times, but I also know that you plan for hard times in good times. And then you plan for good times and hard times. And we've been through difficult times, and we will get through this. How it will look at the end of it it becomes the question. We had planned on hard times, and where we could manage it in a way that the look would be pretty much the same. You go through it, and the effects and the feel of it would not be as severe. This is not going to be that.
So, Mayor, along those lines, operationally, what has changed since, in the last 6 weeks, and what has changed moving forward within how you're running the government and City Hall, specifically looking at public safety? People a lot of times say.
I know people look at first responders and they talk about public safety, and that's usually the ones they talk about when they talk about layoffs. Well, we're going to have to lay off public safety. But we're a city. We provide everything from public safety to building and housing permits, to filling potholes, cutting vacant lots, cutting around abandoned housing, demolition. So all of what we do is essential. It all depends on what service you need. If you need a policeman, it's essential. But if your trash ain't getting collected, that's essential, right? And so it all depends on what services you need. And so what we do, we look at all of that. Right now, all of our essential services, you don't know the difference. Police are out there in full force. We just graduated a class of 72 yesterday, of which I will say at least half, if not more, were minority and females, right? And so we've done a great recruiting effort around that. But the police are out there, emergency medical services out there, fire is out there in terms of public safety. We have our recreation centers are closed, so that's off to the side. But our street programs in terms of resurfacing, potholes, all that's going forward. Waste collection is you wouldn't know the difference. So other than just a few services that allow for or facilitated mass gatherings like recreation or too many people in one spot, you would know the difference. Now, moving forward, if we are forced to, because of economic and revenue sources, forced to do layoffs and reduction or elimination of service, then people will see the difference. Right now, there is no difference. As we move forward and we look at if we have to take a deeper cuts, and we'll look at where they are, what those impacts will be on our operation, and where we will have to prioritize where that is. There's no way that you can avoid safety because that's about 65% of the budget. Now, let me add something else in that people don't think about much. We own utilities and we own an airport. They're enterprise funds, which means they cannot subsidize general fund, but general fund can subsidize them. Fortunately, both of them had a pretty good, healthy cash balance. But this downturn in the economy is significantly impacting activity at the airport. So whatever cash balance that they have is beginning as they try to keep the airport open and stuff, and the airlines are not having passengers, so you don't have landing fees and you don't have employment fees and all that. That revenue stream for the airport is going down. And so they are going to have to begin to use some of their cash balance in order to maintain just a basic opening of the airport. So we're looking at that. And that's not supported by any taxes because their enterprise account is a feed service operation. When we look at utilities, and there's a moratorium on cutoffs and people not paying their bills, and we reconnecting people who previously had got cut off. So they had a healthy cash balance, but as people kind of hold their money back and don't pay their bills, and we restore services to people who haven't been paying bills and they're not going to pay now, that cash balance will begin to kind of dwindle too as their revenue stream goes down. But their costs, and even though they're reducing costs, their revenue streams will go down. So in terms of clean public power, electricity, in terms of division of water, and in terms of airport, those are enterprise funds that are fee services. They're not associated with general fund, which is tax service. They still are feeling the impact. Is fortunate that they had healthy cash balances, but that too, as you know, when you run a business, you can only sustain yourself with reduced revenues and that are below your cost for only so long.
Mayor, we want to thank you very, very much for taking the time today to speak with us and those in our audience. We've got about 60 people that are participating in this webinar today. And as we wrap up, again, thank you very, very much for your time today. But what would you like to leave our audience with today? What message would you like to leave our audience with today as we move forward?
Don't panic. Don't panic. If you panic, you're gonna lose. And if we're in a fight, we're in a struggle, and there are different dynamics coming every day from every different direction. And if we panic in that situation, then we're going to lose. If we get caught up in the politics of it, meaning not Democrat or Republican, but if we get caught up in the politics of what it should be done and all of this, and if we get caught up in this huge debate, while we're talking, the thing is still moving on and it's getting worse, and we will be left behind. So we need to do action. And that's part of what we're attempting to do. We're attempting to do action. Do we believe that the action that we're taking is sufficient to address the totality of this pandemic? No. Do we believe that the action that we're taking is having an impact, particularly on the suffering and the burden of people and businesses, particularly small businesses? And do we believe that in doing what we're doing is going to better position people and businesses for a trajectory for recovery? Yes. Do we believe that this is the panacea that's going to define what Cleveland will look like socially and economically going forward? No. We are in a defining moment that what's normal today will not be normal tomorrow. So in order to address this, we have to be clear-headed, we have to be strategic, and we have to be selfless in terms of our agenda if we're really concerned about the survival of this city, which means the survival of its businesses and its people. We cannot do this in a selfish mode. We cannot do this panicking. We cannot do this based on ideologies or agendas. We cannot do that. And finally, out on the streets, they say a scared man will get you killed. And as true as it can be. And if we go into this and we're in this fight and we're scared, we're gonna die. So that means that we got to suck it up and deal with it the way it needs to be dealt with, and make sure that we come out of this in a way that people and businesses will be better off, and so will the city of Cleveland. And finally, equity is a key issue. This pandemic has pointed out what we already have talked about for a long time, the disparities and inequities associated in the way in which our social and economic system works. And if we do not address that in our new way, in the new norm, then we would have failed, because it's staring us right in the face.
Mayor Jackson, thank you very much. Thanks for taking the
Thank you,
time
Mayor.
today.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Take it easy.